Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and I have a weaving tutorial to share with you today. We're going to be making a DIY weaving loom, and to do this you need some hard cardboard. I'm using some chipboard from the back of a watercolor pad, and I'm going to mark increments that are 1/2 inch across all the way to the end. This is a piece of cardboard that is 9 inches by 12 inches, but you can use any size you'd like. I'm going to be making some increments on this side as well, but I'm starting 1/4 of an inch in, and then I'm going across. And we want to end up with an odd number of strings or increments so that our weaving is done correctly. So I'm making little notches. You want to try to make them as even as possible into the cardboard. And now we're going to use some string in order to string up our loom. Now this is the wrong way to do it, but I did want to show you that I made a huge mistake. In part, I'm showing you this so that you can see what happens at the end of this project and how I fix this huge mistake that I made, but I'm also going to show you the correct way to do this. So don't pay attention too closely. I'm basically making it impossible for me to remove the loom. This is what you actually want to do. We're going to tie off a piece of this string on the edge of the loom. Just gave it a quick double knot. Next, we're going to bring this all the way down to the bottom, and we're going to wrap it around one of those little tabs. And then we're going to take it all the way back to the other side and all the way over, so that on one side we're not wrapping around the tabs. So on basically the top side of your loom, you're going to wrap around each one of those tabs in an alternating fashion. On the bottom side of the loom, you're just going to go through the notch and back up again. Okay, and then when you get to the end, you just want to tie it off. You want to make sure that there are an odd number of strings, so that each time you go around the loom, you're going to be weaving in the opposite direction. So the top part of the loom, you want to go around each notch, and the bottom side of the loom, you just want to go through the notches. Okay, so now we're back to our original project. So we're going to go ahead and weave this. So we've gone over, under for each of those strings, and I'm using some of the string that came with a Harrisville design loom kit. You can also just buy the yarn separately, and for the correction project that I do at the end of this video, I just use some Lamb's Pride wool, which is really great for a younger student because that is a bulkier yarn, and it will go about much easier than using a thinner yarn because it will take a lot longer to weave this project. So the thicker the yarn, the less time it will take. So this is going to be a little different than a typical loom because we're going to be weaving on the front, then we'll flip it over and we're going to weave on the back. So I'm using this tool that came in a different kit, but you can use a ruler just to go over, under with each of your strings, so it's a little bit easier in order to weave your loom. And then you have to remember to flip it to the other side and also alternate each time. Otherwise, you're going to not end up with the correct project at the end. And for our shuttle, we're just using a popsicle stick. And you can see here that my son is just going to use a ruler to go over, under, rather than the tool that came with the kit. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this without having the actual kit. And then he's just going to alternate his colors to create a pattern. Some of that yarn came in a variety pack from Harrisville's design, and some of that yarn is some yarn that we dyed naturally as part of our unit. Okay, so he's going to do the entire thing. However, it gets really difficult to do that very last 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch. And that usually stalls the project because it can be, 90% of the project got done really fast, and that last 10%, I needed to help him with it. So we're going to use a yarn needle. This one happens to have a pretty pointy tip, so you want to make sure that you're not splitting the string as you go over, under at the top of our loom, our DIY loom. And the needle is just going to help us get into those spaces that we couldn't normally get into with the tool that came with the kit. You could also use a chopstick, or you could use bamboo skewer, but I find that the needle and the yarn work pretty well. Regardless, as you get to the very, very top, it can get really tight. So you just want to pull down your project, like pull down the weaving a little bit so you have a little bit more space, so that at the end you can get it nice and full, and you don't have any empty space at the very top. Okay, so I've got 2 colors of some Lamb's Pride bulky weight yarn, and we're going to make our twizzle before I show you how to remove our project from our loom. So we have a couple of yards of yarn, and I've used 2 colors, but you could just use 1 color if you'd like. I'm going to fold them over so that I basically have 4 strands, and I've got my son holding one end, and I've got the rest of the yarn in my hand at the part that's already looped, and we're going to twist, and we're going to keep twisting and twisting and twisting. It takes about a minute or so. You want to keep twisting. And then because this is so long, I'm letting the twist kind of travel down the yarn, but he needs to hold the other end. If you don't hold it, then all your twisting goes to waste. So hold it nice and snug. And then once you've twisted it till you can't twist it anymore, hold both pieces together and release it, and you can see that they just twizzle onto each other and then they won't come apart. So that is going to be our handle for our bag, and we're going to sew that in. But it was a little bit too short, so we did it again with about almost twice as much yarn, and that way it's big enough to become almost like a crossbody satchel. Okay, so I'm having him remove the yarn, or rather the string, from our loom, and I'm realizing that we've made a huge mistake on both sides. We've basically, and I'm realizing this for the first time, we've woven ourselves into a little bit of a problem because we cannot remove our loom from the kit, and from the project, and there's no other remedy I searched than to trim off our string. It was so sad that we couldn't even just remove the cardboard, because then we wouldn't end up with a bag, because our loom project would just be one solid piece. So I needed to do this. I need to remove or cut all the string, and now we can remove our DIY loom, the cardboard, which you can actually reuse if you don't bend it and damage it this way. And I'll show you with the correction project how you can reuse these looms over and over again. Even if the tabs start to bend too much, you can just trim those off and make your whole loom just a little bit smaller each time, so you can use these multiple times. Just want to be careful about removing it from the loom, because that string is still kind of snug between each of those tabs. So it takes a little bit of work to get them apart. And then you can just put the entire project right side out. And just this one turned out so beautifully. I love all the different colors and the pattern that he did. It's really, really nice. Because he used a very thin yarn, it's a very tight weave. It's very beautiful. But now we have to fix our problem. And I'm looking at each of these strings and trying to figure out what we can do to keep this whole project from unraveling. And I'm going to try to tie these 2 strings together. And I'm realizing that the only way I can do that is if I reduce his project by a little bit, and I take off the last little bit of weaving that we did, which is maybe about 8 rows of weaving with a bulky yarn. So I'm going to remove all of that to free up some of the string so that I can tie it off. And this delayed the project quite a bit, but it salvaged weeks of work, and it looks okay in the end. It's not great, but it totally looks okay in the end. It's still usable, and it's one of those things where a mistake like this, it's hard to recognize, and the only way to remedy it is at the end, and you don't want to lose the whole project. So this is what we did. So I tied it all off for him, trimmed it all down, and now we just want to adjust the bag and just make sure that all the weaving is kind of even, because you'll end up with a bit of a gap at the top and the bottom, and you just want to make sure that you've woven really tightly so that you have a little bit of wiggle room. Next, we want to attach our twizzle, and to do this I'm going to use a needle that basically has a sharp point but also a large eye. That way I can get my bulky yarn through the eye of the needle. I'm just going to tie off this one part of the twizzle really tightly, because this part could potentially come undone. And next we want to sew it into the side of the bag. And you want to do this quite well because this is the part that's going to get the most wear and tear. This is the part that's going to be held. If you start to put a lot of things into your bag, it's going to really start to pull at that weaving. So you want to make sure that it's really well sewn in. And for this, I am just using some bulky yarn, and I'm going to go through it multiple times. Now, this project was for my 13-year-old son. We did a similar weaving project with my 8-year-old daughter, which ended up just being one solid piece of weaving. But this is a lot of fun because with just a little bit more effort, you can end up with a bag, which is a lot of fun for the children to see at the end. It becomes something usable right away. Although with just a solid piece of weaving, it does open up the possibilities for other projects that you could do with it, or just an open-ended play item. But this was especially wonderful for my 13-year-old son. At the end, he puts his DIY leather journal into it. It fits just right. Okay, so I'm going to double lock this last little bit. And rather than weave the yarn back into the project, I'm just going to trim it off. And I'm going to do the same thing to both sides so that it's nice and snug and it's all done, mistakes and all. And there's his field journal that we made for one of our units, and it fits just right inside. Okay, so let me go back to our correction project and show you how easily this is supposed to come off of our DIY loom. You can see that one side has it looped around each of the tabs, whereas the other side does not. So we want to remove the parts that are looped around each tab. And I'm just using my needle to help me through this. You could use your finger, but this makes it a little bit easier to get through the tabs. I did want to keep this loom intact so we could use it again. And if the tabs get a little bit too damaged, again, you can just trim them off and then make new notches. So look at this, it just slides off really easily, no trimming, and you can see that it keeps that whole weaving in place because that string is now looped along one side and then looped along the other side so your weaving doesn't unravel. Again, you want to be really careful about getting it off the loom, and here I'm just going to pull it right side out in the process of removing the loom. But I also want to gingerly remove the string that is stuck between each of those tabs. You don't want to pull too tightly. And once all of the string is off, then you can adjust your project and kind of move some of the weaving down into that extra space, as well as the top. And that's just going to stay in place. It's not going to come apart. And so I also added a twizzle to this one. This one's for my daughter. And this was made with Lamb's Pride bulky weight yarn. And it looks really beautiful in the end. It's a solid color versus my son's, who did the multi-color, which I thought looked really beautiful as well. If you'd like to see some of our other handwork projects, you can tap on the screen. And if you'd like to see some of our American history units that this project went along with, you can also tap on the screen right now. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video for more information and more tutorials. And if you want to see what our homeschool looks like on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.